It all began in the kind of quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone waved from their driveways and pretended life was perfect. I had poured every last dollar and weekend into my dream home, a spacious two-story with a generous backyard that backed onto a small wooded greenbelt. For 2 peaceful years, that backyard was my sanctuary. Morning coffee on the deck, evening barbecues under string lights, and the kind of privacy every homeowner craves. Then the new neighbors moved in next door, the Harringtons. They arrived with moving trucks, designer landscaping plans, and big smiles that seemed just a little too polished. Mr. Harrington worked in finance, Mrs. Harrington chaired the local HOA board, and they wasted no time telling everyone how they planned to elevate the community standards. At first, I thought nothing of the friendly waves or the casual small talk over the hedge, but one crisp autumn weekend, while I was out of town visiting family, something changed. I returned late Sunday night, headlights cutting through the darkness, and pulled into my driveway exhausted but happy to be home. The next morning, as I stepped outside with my coffee, my stomach dropped. A brand new 6-foot wooden privacy fence now ran along what I had always believed was our shared property line. It was perfectly straight, freshly stained, and unmistakably built 6 full feet onto my land. My backyard had been sliced in half overnight. The section they claimed now included part of my prized rose garden, the spot where I had planned to build a fire pit, and the only area that caught full afternoon sun. I walked the entire length in disbelief, measuring with my phone. The posts were sunk deep, concrete footings already set. No notice, no survey, no permission. Just a silent land grab while I was gone. My heart raced as I realized the Harringtons had done this deliberately, betting I would simply accept it or be too intimidated to fight back. They had turned my peaceful oasis into their extended backyard without a word. What they didn't know was that this single act of greed would ignite a firestorm of consequences. Their perfectly manicured backyard paradise, with its new pool, patio, and expensive outdoor kitchen, was about to become completely useless, and their regret would be instant, permanent, and entirely of their own making. But that morning, standing there staring at the fresh-cut cedar planks, I had no idea how far this would go. I only knew one thing. They had crossed the wrong line, literally and figuratively.
Chapter 1. The Harringtons had only been in the neighborhood for 3 short months when the fence appeared, but in that brief time, they had already managed to insert themselves into every community decision. Mrs. Harrington, with her perfectly highlighted hair and HOA board badge, spent her days patrolling the streets in her white SUV, clipboard in hand, ready to issue violation notices for grass that was half an inch too long or holiday lights left up past January. Mr. Harrington followed behind her like an enforcer, nodding along to every complaint. They spoke constantly about protecting property values and maintaining standards, yet somehow their own backyard renovation seemed exempt from the very rules they loved to enforce on everyone else. I first noticed the survey stakes one random Tuesday evening while taking out the trash. Small orange flags dotted the ground along what I believed was our shared boundary, but they were placed a full 6 feet inside my yard. At the time, I shrugged it off as routine utility work, or perhaps a mistake by the landscaping crew the Harringtons had hired. They had been talking non-stop about expanding their outdoor living space, new pool, new patio, new everything. I assumed the stakes were temporary. I had no reason to suspect malice. The neighborhood had always been friendly, the kind of place where people borrowed tools and watched each other's houses during vacations. 3 days later, the trucks arrived while I was away for the weekend visiting my sister in the next state. When I returned, the transformation was complete. The wooden fence stood tall and imposing, cutting straight through my backyard like a scar. The posts were set in fresh concrete, the panels were uniform and expensive looking, and the entire structure was positioned so that a generous portion of my land, was now trapped on their side. My rose bushes, which had taken 3 years to establish, were now behind their fence. The sunny corner where I had planned summer evenings was gone. Even the natural drainage slope that kept water away from my foundation now funneled toward their new patio. I spent the entire morning walking the fence line, phone in hand, taking photos from every angle. The more I looked, the more deliberate it appeared. They had chosen the exact weekend I was gone. They had worked quietly at night with floodlights. No one in the neighborhood had mentioned seeing anything unusual, which meant they had either paid for silence or simply waited until the street was empty. My blood began to boil as the realization set in. This wasn't a careless mistake. This was calculated theft. They had stolen 6 feet of my property, roughly 800 square feet of my backyard, and turned it into an extension of their own private resort.
I stood there that afternoon, the sun warming the cedar planks, and felt a strange mix of rage and disbelief. How could anyone be so bold? The Harringtons had smiled and waved at me just days earlier, asking about my weekend plans as if they weren't already plotting to claim part of my land. Their backyard, now visible over the top of the new fence, looked like something from a magazine. Imported stone pavers, a sparkling new pool, outdoor kitchen with built-in grill, and perfectly trimmed hedges. All of it now benefited from my stolen land. The fence blocked my view of the greenbelt and cast long shadows across what remained of my yard. By evening, I had printed the photos, marked the property line on an old plat map I kept in my filing cabinet, and sat at my kitchen table staring at the evidence. The more I thought about it, the clearer the pattern became. The Harringtons weren't just bad neighbors. They were the kind of people who believed rules applied to everyone except them. Mrs. Harrington had already issued me 2 minor HOA notices in the past month for visual clutter on my deck. Now they had taken it to the next level. They had literally redrawn the map of my property while I was away. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that fence line slicing through my roses. The next morning, I decided to approach them calmly and reasonably. I rehearsed what I would say, keeping my tone friendly but firm. I would show them the plat map, explain the mistake, and offer to help them relocate the fence at my expense if they moved it immediately. I still believed there might be a simple misunderstanding. I still believed people could be decent. But as I walked across the lawn toward their front door that sunny morning, I had no idea that this single fence would trigger months of conflict, legal battles, and eventually a revenge so complete and so satisfying that the Harringtons would never enjoy their backyard again. Their perfect little paradise was about to become their personal nightmare, and the regret they felt would hit them harder than the concrete footings they had poured on my land. Chapter 2. The moment I stepped onto their driveway and knocked on the door, I could feel the shift in the air. Mrs. Harrington answered wearing her usual perfectly pressed blouse and HOA smile, but the smile faded the instant she saw the folder in my hand. I explained the situation as calmly as possible, showing her the plat map and the photos I had taken. I pointed out where the fence clearly crossed the true property line according to county records. I even offered to pay for half the cost of moving it if they handled the labor right away. I wanted peace. I wanted my yard back without turning this into a war. Instead of the apology I expected, she crossed her arms and told me the fence was exactly where it belonged. She claimed they had done their own survey months ago and that the line had always been 6 feet farther onto my side. Her husband appeared behind her, nodding along as if repeating a script. They insisted the old boundary markers had been wrong for years and that their new fence was simply correcting a long-standing error. When I asked to see their survey paperwork, they refused, saying it was private and that I should trust them as good neighbors. The audacity was breathtaking. I stood there on their porch for 20 minutes trying to reason with them, but every point I made was met with deflection. They brought up HOA covenants about uniform fencing and community aesthetics, implying that my objections were somehow selfish. Mrs. Harrington even suggested that my backyard looked better now with their fence providing privacy. The conversation went in circles until they finally closed the door in my face, telling me to take it up with the HOA board if I had a problem. That evening, I sat on what remained of my deck and watched the sun set behind their new fence. Shadows stretched long across my truncated lawn. I could hear laughter and splashing from their pool on the other side, the pool that now sat partly on my stolen land. The sound made my stomach turn. They were celebrating their victory while I stared at the half yard they had left me. I spent the next several days researching property law, printing every document I could find, and speaking with friends who had dealt with similar disputes. Everyone told me the same thing: get a professional survey immediately. By the end of the week, I had contacted a licensed surveyor and scheduled the work. The Harringtons must have seen the surveyor's truck, because the next morning Mrs. Harrington was at my door with 2 other HOA board members. They demanded to know why I was stirring up trouble and warned me that filing complaints could affect my standing in the community. Their tone had changed from polite to threatening. They reminded me that the HOA had the power to fine me for minor infractions and that fighting them would be expensive and exhausting. I remained calm on the outside, but inside the anger was building into something cold and determined. I realized then that this wasn't about a simple fence. This was about power. The Harringtons believed they could take whatever they wanted because they controlled the HOA. They had chosen me as their target because I lived alone and had no one to back me up. They assumed I would fold.
The surveyor arrived 2 days later and spent 4 hours measuring, marking, and photographing everything. When he handed me the official report, the truth was crystal clear in black and white. The fence sat 6 feet and 4 inches onto my property. The concrete footings were entirely on my land. The Harringtons had no legal leg to stand on. I made copies of the report and prepared to deliver one to them personally. But before I could even walk next door, Mrs. Harrington had already called an emergency HOA meeting and sent out a mass email accusing me of harassing them over a minor boundary misunderstanding. The neighborhood was now divided. Some people sided with me quietly, but most stayed silent, afraid of the HOA's power. I could feel the pressure mounting. That night, as I reviewed the surveyor's drawings under my kitchen light, I made a decision. If they wanted to play dirty, I would play smarter. I would follow every legal step, document everything, and when the time was right, I would make sure their backyard, the one they had built on stolen land, became something they could never enjoy again. The regret they would feel would be slow, legal, and devastatingly effective.
Chapter 3. The emergency HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse the following Thursday evening. The room was packed. Mrs. Harrington stood at the front in her official board blazer, microphone in hand, painting me as the aggressor who was disrupting neighborhood harmony over a fence that she claimed was mutually beneficial. She showed photos of their beautiful new backyard and implied that my objections were purely spiteful. Several board members nodded along, already on her side. I sat quietly in the back row with my folder of evidence. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, walked to the front, and laid out the surveyor's report on the table for everyone to see. Page after page of stamped official measurements proved beyond any doubt that the fence was entirely on my property. I spoke clearly and without emotion, sticking only to facts. The room went silent. Even Mrs. Harrington's usual confidence faltered for a moment. But instead of admitting defeat, the board quickly moved to table the discussion and promised to review the matter. They suggested mediation through the HOA instead of legal action. I agreed to mediation only because I wanted everything documented. Over the next 2 weeks, the mediation sessions became a circus. The Harringtons brought their own expert who claimed the old property pins had been moved decades ago. They demanded I pay for half the fence removal and accused me of trying to devalue their home. The mediator, clearly uncomfortable, kept urging compromise, but there was no compromise possible when one side had literally stolen land. Every session ended with Mrs. Harrington threatening further HOA violations against me if I pursued the matter. My patience was wearing thin, but I kept meticulous records of every word, every email, every threat. Meanwhile, life next door grew louder. The Harringtons hosted pool parties almost every weekend, music blaring over the fence into my remaining yard. They deliberately positioned speakers so the sound carried toward my house. It was psychological warfare. I could hear them laughing about teaching the neighbor a lesson. By the end of the month, I had hired a property attorney. The lawyer reviewed everything and confirmed I had an ironclad case. He sent a formal demand letter giving the Harringtons 30 days to remove the fence and restore my land at their expense. The letter was polite but firm, citing trespass, encroachment, and potential damages. The response came quickly. The Harringtons refused to move the fence and countersued through the HOA, claiming adverse possession and emotional distress. The legal fees began to add up, but I refused to back down. This had become about more than 6 feet of grass. It was about standing up to bullies who thought they could take whatever they wanted.
Chapter 4. The court date was set for 3 months later. In the meantime, the fence remained, a daily reminder of their theft. I used that time wisely. I documented every single incident, the noise from their parties, the shadows cast on my remaining yard, the way water now pooled against my foundation because their fence blocked natural drainage. My attorney built a strong file. When the surveyor's final certified plat arrived, it was irrefutable. The county recorder's office also confirmed my ownership. I shared copies with my attorney and waited. The Harringtons, sensing the walls closing in, began a smear campaign in the neighborhood group chat. They claimed I was unstable and harassing them. A few neighbors privately messaged me their support, but no one wanted to speak publicly against the HOA board. One afternoon, I noticed new survey stakes on their side, clearly an attempt to create confusion. I photographed them immediately and sent the images to my lawyer. The pattern was obvious: delay, deny, deflect. But the law was on my side. The day the judge reviewed the evidence in chambers, everything changed. The Harringtons' attorney tried every trick, but the official survey and county records left no room for argument. The judge ordered the fence removed within 60 days and awarded me damages for trespass.
The Harringtons were furious. Mrs. Harrington stormed out of the courthouse muttering threats. Even with the court order, they dragged their feet. They filed appeals and requested extensions. Meanwhile, their pool parties grew louder, as if daring me to do something. I stayed patient. I knew the real revenge would come after the fence came down, or rather, because of what I would build in its place on my own land. Chapter 5. The 60-day deadline arrived, and the Harringtons still hadn't removed the fence. My attorney filed for contempt. Rather than wait, I decided to act on my own side of the line. I hired a crew to build a 12-foot-tall solid privacy wall directly along my legal boundary, inside my own property. The wall was engineered to block every bit of their view and sunlight to the pool area. At the same time, I installed a sophisticated drainage system that redirected all rainwater back onto their side, creating constant pooling around their patio. I also planted fast-growing bamboo and thorny hedges along the wall, species known to reach 15 feet in a single season. On my side, I added a small permitted workshop shed positioned to cast maximum shadow over their outdoor kitchen. Solar-powered motion lights were installed facing their yard, set to bright flood mode every time someone walked near the fence. Wind chimes and reflective mirrors completed the package, creating constant noise and glare. Every element was 100% legal, permitted, and built entirely on my land. The Harringtons watched from their windows as their once perfect backyard was slowly turned into a dark, noisy, waterlogged prison. Their expensive pool now sat in permanent shade. Their patio collected standing water that bred mosquitoes. The view they had paid for was gone.
Chapter 6. Within weeks, the changes took full effect. The Harringtons' backyard, once the envy of the neighborhood, was now unusable. The pool sat in deep shadow and stayed cold. Mosquitoes swarmed the standing water. Their outdoor kitchen was blocked by my tall wall and shed. Guests stopped coming. The laughter that used to drift over the fence turned into angry arguments between the couple. Mrs. Harrington tried one last desperate HOA complaint, but the court order protected me. My attorney sent a final notice reminding them of the contempt charges if the original fence wasn't removed immediately. Under legal pressure, they finally dismantled it, but the damage was done. Their backyard was ruined by the legal structures I had built on my own property. 6 months later, the Harringtons put their house on the market and moved away quietly. The new buyers were shocked when they learned the history, but my yard was restored to full size and better than ever. The tall wall and plantings stayed, my legal privacy screen that also served as a permanent reminder. The Harringtons had secretly built their fence on my land, thinking they could get away with it. Their regret was instant the moment they realized I would not only win, but make sure they could never enjoy the backyard they had stolen to create. Justice, when served cold and completely legal, tastes sweeter than any pool party. And in this neighborhood, everyone now knows, never steal land from the quiet guy next door. Within a few weeks, the changes became dramatic. The tall wall and rapidly growing bamboo blocked nearly all sunlight to the pool, keeping the water cold and uninviting. The redirected drainage created large puddles that attracted mosquitoes and made the patio slippery and unusable. The homeowner added solar-powered motion-activated floodlights that lit up their entire backyard brightly every time someone stepped outside at night. A small workshop shed was equipped with occasional power tools that created just enough noise to disturb their peace without breaking any noise ordinances. Reflective mirrors and strategic wind chimes added constant, irritating glare and sound. The Harringtons' expensive outdoor kitchen now sat in permanent shade. Their pool parties stopped completely. Guests no longer wanted to visit. The once proud couple could be seen arguing frequently in their now useless backyard. Their dream home was turning into a prison of their own making. Chapter 7. The final phase completed the transformation. More mature plants filled in the gaps, creating a dense living wall that completely cut off their view of the greenbelt. The workshop shed was used occasionally for projects that produced just enough sound and activity to ruin any chance of relaxation. The combination of shade, standing water, noise, and bright lights at night made the backyard practically unusable. The Harringtons tried one last desperate attempt through the HOA, but the court order protected the homeowner. Every complaint was dismissed. Mrs. Harrington's confidence had completely vanished. The couple who had arrived with such arrogance now looked defeated every time they stepped outside. Their beautiful investment was ruined, and they knew exactly who was responsible. Yet they could do nothing, because everything was built legally on the homeowner's own property. 6 months after the revenge construction began, the Harringtons' backyard was unrecognizable. The pool stayed cold and shaded, the patio was constantly wet and mosquito-infested. Their outdoor kitchen was blocked and rarely used. The once lively space had become a dark, noisy, and unpleasant area they avoided entirely. Under mounting legal pressure and contempt threats, they finally removed their original encroaching fence. But it was too late. The damage to their enjoyment was permanent. The tall privacy wall, mature bamboo, drainage changes, and workshop remained, all perfectly legal and highly effective. Unable to enjoy their home any longer, the Harringtons quietly put their house on the market and moved away a few months later. The new buyers were told the full story and wisely chose not to challenge the boundary structures. The homeowner restored the rest of his yard to its full glory and even improved it. He now enjoyed complete privacy and a beautiful backyard that felt even better after the victory. The Harringtons had secretly built their fence on someone else's land, thinking they could get away with it. Their regret was instant the moment the consequences began, and it only grew stronger with time. In the end, justice was served, cold, legal, and completely satisfying. The neighborhood learned an important lesson: never steal land from the quiet neighbor who knows how to fight back smartly.